Bruce Sackman is a former investigator and the author of Behind the Murder Curtain, True Medical Crime Stories, and he joins us now live from New York. And you have covered many medical horror stories, frankly, in your time. Have you noticed any similarities with this story? It's really shocked us here in the UK, but I believe that you've covered similar cases in the past.
I have seen so many similarities that I'm actually mad as hell that this case proceeded on the way that it did. And I'm not blaming the police for this, but having completed these cases for over 20 years, let me tell you something. I am very, very tired of victims who are crying out because these cases could have been solved much earlier than they were. And I'm not blaming the police for this. What I'm blaming and what I've seen over the years is, one, cover-ups by management. So many cases throughout the world where brave doctors and nurses who are whistleblowers have come forth to management only to be poo-pooed, only to be told, be quiet and go back to your office and don't make waves. And I've seen this throughout the world in my 20-year career of doing these investigations. And you know what? I have not seen yet a hospital that has his staff properly trained on how to handle these allegations, on when to refer these matters to the police. And finally, many times the police themselves, and not particularly in this case, but the police themselves are not even properly trained on how to conduct these investigations. My heart goes out to these families. Enough already. Enough of these cases. There are about 4 or 5 of these ongoing throughout the world right now as we speak. And unless there is some serious criminal investigations involving the managers who knew about these cases and stop any investigation from happening, these cases will continue.
Okay, well, Bruce, what about the perpetrator, Lucy Letby herself? One headline in front of me says, "One final act of wickedness from a coward." Yesterday, and her not appearing in court to hear what the families had to say about what she did. What's your view on that?
Well, here in the United States, the defendant always has to listen to what the families say. And if you've ever sat in court and listened, it's the most heart-wrenching thing you ever want to hear. In a number of cases that I had, the families would get up and they would say, you know, my dad, he served in the war, he survived the war, only to be murdered at a veterans hospital. Yes, the defendant must listen, but I want to tell you something. There are some defendants who might actually like it. They might actually like to hear the suffering of the victims' families, as strange as that sounds. Because I've had cases where the medical serial killer, after they killed the victim, would contact the family and go into great detail, Dad's last 30 minutes on the face of the earth. This was their second bite of the apple. The first bite was actually murdering the patient. The second bite was calling up the family and telling them what happened. In the case of Lucy Letby, we see that she did, in fact, actually contact the family. Now, she didn't want to be there to hear this, but I've had cases where I actually think the medical serial killer enjoyed, yes, as strange as it sounds, enjoyed hearing the family and how much they suffered from a result of his actions.
What makes this Lucy Letby case so unusual is not only the fact that, of course, she was a young female, which, you know, is so rare in this country anyway. I think she's only the 4th person to get a whole life jail sentence, but also the fact that she was in the medical profession. It's something that the judge pointed out, that it was a gross breach that all citizens place in those working in the medical profession, a position of trust. And the thing that I just can't get my head around is the why. Will we ever know why Lucy Letby set about doing something like this when she was in a caring profession?
Well, I'm no psychiatrist or psychologist, but I can tell you what I've learned after 20 years of doing these cases. There was a very, very similar case to Lucy Letby in Massachusetts at a veterans hospital. Kristen Gilbert is the woman's name. She even looks like Lucy Letby. And she would love to put patients into a code, a cardiac arrest. And then she would show off to the staff how talented she was. But not only would she do that, interestingly enough, when a code was called, her boyfriend, who was on the code team, would come. And witnesses actually saw them grabbing each other and sort of enjoying the code. And she certainly enjoyed showing off to the staff. Now, psychiatrists referred to this as Munchausen syndrome by proxy. And I've seen this throughout the world. This, in my opinion, is probably what happened with Lucy Letby. Not only did she want attention from the staff, but she wanted attention from that one regent who would show up every time there was a code, and she wanted to show off to him. And we've seen similar situations throughout the world.
I
Terrible.
know you were saying, Bruce, that some assailants, they want to have that power over the families again. They want to hear the family distress. They want to relive their actions. But obviously that wasn't the case with Letby. She didn't want to face them. Where would you stand on the testimonies from victims being pled into a holding cell for the prisoner? In other words, if Letby yesterday was handcuffed to a desk and there were 4 speakers around her with what went on, there was going to be no escape. The thing that gets me about this, the formality of a court, particularly in Britain, I heard all this nonsense. What if they squealed? What if they made a scene in court? What if they did? So what? But there seems to be this fear that decorum has to apply and solemnity has to apply in the area. Where would you stand on making the prisoner hear the testimonies from families?
The prisoner should definitely hear the testimonies from the families. The families have every right to confront the victim and let the victim know the harm that he or she has caused the family. I have seen this many times in cases throughout the United States. And I tell you, it's very, very moving to physically be there and listen to the families. But most of the defendants will just sit there and they will have no reaction. And on rare occasions, 1 or 2 actually, strangely enough, seem to enjoy hearing the suffering. But I would support, I think the families have every right in the world to confront someone who has been found guilty and let them know how much they have hurt their family.
Just finally, I don't know in the stories that you've covered if you've followed their time in prison, but a lot of people wondering, if Lucy's actually getting a pretty easy sentence in the sense she'll never have to work, she'll never have to pay taxes, she'll never have to worry about putting food on the table until the day she dies. She's going to have a tough time behind bars, though,
from
the other prisoners.
She'll never get a chance to kill anyone else again.
Well, this is true, but, what's it like in jail for somebody when they're serving these kinds of serial terms?
Well, it actually depends on the institution. I have a Dr. Michael Swango, who killed people throughout the world. He got sentenced to 3 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. And he's in something we call Supermax Federal Penitentiary in Florence, Colorado. And there he gets 1 hour time outside, and the rest of the time he's in isolation. And that's a life nobody would want. But interestingly enough, in the case of Kristen Gilbert, who murdered a number of our nation's heroes at the Northampton VA Medical Center, she also got sentenced to multiple life terms. And when she's in prison, I'm sitting in the office one day and my agents come in and they tell me, "Hey, Bruce, have you seen today's New York Post?" I said, "No, what's in today's New York Post?" And they said, "Well, Kristen Gilbert is having an affair, a lesbian affair with Squeaky Fromm." And if you remember the name Squeaky Fromm was one of Charles Manson's people that went around killing people with Charles Manson. So out of all the people in the prison, She picked Squeaky Fromm because she still wanted the attention, and she still got the attention. And people are still able to write them in jail. But I know you don't have capital punishment in Great Britain. We have capital punishment in some states. In the federal government, we have capital punishment. But it's not a life that any of us would want. But I understand how the families feel. You know, I often ask myself, if somebody in my family was a victim of this, would I want them to be executed or not? I don't know. I would. Well, I'm really not sure. But no, to answer your question, life is not going to be fun.
Well, you're a fascinating man to listen to, Bruce Sackman. Bruce is a former investigator, and his book is Behind the Murder Curtain, True Medical Crime Stories. Thank you very much indeed for your time this morning, which I know is a very unsociable time for you in New York. Thank you.
You're very welcome. I'd like to leave you with this thought. Ask your officials, what are they going to do to prevent this from happening again? You know, I've heard a lot of people talk about the investigation, and a lot of people talk about the victims, and that's wonderful. But what is your government going to do to prevent this from happening again? Because if they do nothing, I guarantee you it will happen again.